Hello, Felix from Nintendo Life here, and today we're having a look at 10 of the best video game soundtracks on the Nintendo Switch. Video game music is insanely underrated, when in matter of fact it's one of the most important things in a game, in my opinion at least. Now this list will be in no particular order, and if I missed any obvious picks, which I probably did, let me know in the comments below, and I might in the future make another one of these with your suggestions. But without further ado, let's just get on with the list and start with one devilishly good soundtrack. The main principle of Cuphead is that you have to defeat bosses to get their soul for the devil himself. The soundtrack was composed by Christopher Madigan, a childhood friend of the brothers who created the game, and features almost 3 hours of jazz/big band music, with also a sprinkle of some ragtime piano, together with some barbershop choir. All these songs are played by live musicians, and what's even more impressive is that all 24 stages have their own unique and original music piece. On top of that, each song has multiple solos that rotate around, so the first time you might hear a trumpet solo, but the second time you will maybe hear a piano solo or a saxophone solo. It really helps keep the soundtrack fresh, because you will be listening to these songs and dying a lot. Trust me, you will, because this game is really hard. There are 56 tracks in Cuphead, and every single one is just so incredibly good. Christopher really did a fantastic job creating some songs you'll never mistake for not being in Cuphead, but they have enough variety so they each stand on their own in a good, satisfying way. Now, let's move on to the second one on this list. It's a really bony soundtrack. Composed by Toby Fox, who besides making the music, also made the entirety of Undertale by himself. Story, character design, yeah, everything was done by Toby, aside for a bit of sprite work by Temmie Chang. Toby Fox was a massive fan of the Mother series, or Earthbound, and it's clear to see that from the results. Not only the story and the art style, but also the music is very reminiscent of songs from Mother and its sequel. Having said that, Toby has managed to make some of the most memorable and original tunes and melodies, well, ever. Undertale features 101 original songs, where there's everything from boss fights to songs that genuinely make you cry, and even this. Yeah, not all songs are songs, but that's just the style and humor that Toby has, and I really love that. You can also see that in the way he names his songs, like some of the tracks are pretty normally named, like Megalovania, Bone Trazzle, Spider Dance, but then there's some tracks called Bird that carries you over a disproportionately small gap. Or, can you really call this a hotel? I didn't receive a mint on my pillow or anything. Toby also relies heavily on musical motifs, so a lot of the songs are very similar but with subtle differences. For example, when you meet the character Papyrus, you hear his main theme, but without the drums and generally in a slower tempo. But when you eventually fight him, it's his theme again, but much more energetic and epic with drums and everything, perfectly fitting for a boss fight. He does this with all the characters in the game, and it pays off big time. It makes so that all the songs are stuck in your head just a bit longer. Not in a bad way, but when you hear something a lot, it's bound to stay in your head longer than something you only hear once. Toby's compositions are some of the best I've heard in my life, and the songs like Spider Dance, Dummy, and Fallen Down Reprise, they just fill you with determination. Now, the third pick on the list is maybe a bit wild. It's The Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild. Breath of the Wild perfectly encapsulates the feeling of a kingdom that fell in battle 100 years ago. Most of the time when you're roaming the giant Hyrule in the grasslands, deserts, or snowy mountains, you'll just hear some environmental sounds, few reverse piano notes, and some flute along the way. But man, when the music finally kicks in, let's just say you're gonna have a good time. Composed by Manaka Kataoka, Yasuaki Iwata, and Hajime Wakai, Breath of the Wild has over 200 compositions in the game, and there is something for everyone. Instilling terror, hominess, and even the best song ever made, Cars theme. But seriously, how can an accordion go that hard? This game's soundtrack goes wild with time signatures. Most video game soundtracks go in the time signature 4/4 or 3/4, but Breath of the Wild have tracks going in 5/4, 6/4, and even songs that don't have a particular time signature to speak of. To further illustrate this, let's have a look at the main battle theme. From what we've been able to analyze, the later parts are in 7/4, but the start? Well, I have no idea. That could be 32/2. I don't know. Hey Alex, what do you think it's in? See? None of us know, and that means we don't know. Some people probably do, but I don't. Moving on. The amazing thing is that you don't actually stop up and think, wait, this song is going up in a weird time signature. It just flows so organically. When you hear music in the most common time signature, 4/4, your mind gets used to that very quickly, so it's easier to predict what's coming up and can feel even wrong if it just gets cut off all of a sudden. But with more strange time signatures like 7/4 and this early main battle theme, your mind is not used to counting that, and therefore isn't disturbed if it just ends, which is ideal for combat, because that could literally just conclude at any point in the track. All in all, Breath of the Wild just have some of the best songs I've ever heard in my life. From Rito Village's night theme, with a delicious homage to Dragon Roost Island from Wind Waker, to the horseback riding theme, when you're traversing great parts of the map on your good old horsey boy. Yeah, he's not a boy. And the main theme. I could talk about this game for hours, but we also have other games on the list, so jumping from one huge open world game to another. The next soundtrack is from the video game vastly different from anything else on this list. The Witcher takes place in the Middle Ages, where you're playing as Geralt, a witcher slaying monsters for coin. The songs from The Witcher 3 are composed by Marcin Szyberowicz and Mikołaj Stroiński, try saying that 3 times in a row, and they also got help from the band Parsifal. They just get you instantly into the right mindset of the game with their compositions. Using a lot of medieval instruments, they've produced songs and vibes that you simply just can't get with modern instruments. You've got music for when you're roaming the huge open world, brilliant combat music, and my personal favorite, the music that plays when you're playing Gwent, that card game that Geralt just wants to play with literally anyone he meets. The Witcher's soundtrack is original and fantastic, and you instantly know that it's The Witcher when you hear it. Helping to the fact is also this woman. Yeah, you can love it or hate it, but that's The Witcher. Overall, the soundtrack for The Witcher beautifully encapsulates the medieval-esque feeling and knows exactly when to play the right tracks for the right moments. And now, jumping from a huge AAA game made by hundreds of people, we're going to an indie game. It goes by the name Hollow Knight. In Hollow Knight, you take the role of a little fellow that traverses a vast, diverse underground who basically doesn't have a name. Fighting bug foes, getting new charms. The whole premise of the game is that you're exploring a kingdom that has now fallen, with small towns remaining and the rest of the land infected by enemy bugs that are trying their best to kill you. People say Hollow Knight was made by 3 people. Nay, it was 4. Because the 3 people are not including the composer Christopher Larkin, who made the incredible soundtrack of this game. The soundtrack perfectly encapsulates the game's concept, and I would even go so far to say that it's the most important thing to set the tone of this game. The game's soundtrack starts off very simple, with some piano, but the further you explore the underground, the more the soundtrack expands, and it ends up with a small orchestra. Hollow Knight has this very lonely and melancholic feel to it. And even though the base game only has 26 songs, it never feels repetitive, and I was actually really surprised to find out that the track number was that low. The hand-drawn art style of this game is so original and unique, and the amazing thing is that I feel this soundtrack falls under the same category. It's so fresh and fits the art style so well, that is a feat on its own, and I can't appreciate the work that Christopher Larkin has done enough. Wow. We've now reached the 6th soundtrack on this list. You could say that it's a bit colorful. Splatoon 2's soundtrack was one of those soundtracks that I didn't really think of after I stopped playing it, but going back and listening to it, I just got reminded of how good this soundtrack really is. You play as an Inkling or Octoling, and your goal is to ink your opponents with guns. Yeah, weird concept, right? Well, the music perfectly capitalizes on that weirdness, and that's what I love about it. It's this weird upbeat rock type feel to it, combined with odd synths and the iconic Inkling/Octoling voice. I like to imagine that there's a live band playing on a platform off camera while the matches are going. Even though a lot of the tracks might seem a bit different, they're all just so rememberable. I was listening to the entire OST here the other day, and even though I didn't play a lot of Splatoon, I could just sing along to every single song. Now that's good composing. A cool thing about the soundtrack is how different they are in the different game modes, where the online multiplayer has this upbeat rock type feel to it like I said before, and the single player has this very electronic and simple vibe to it. A very cool thing that adds to the lore of this game is that the songs are actually played by fictional bands in the Splatoon universe. For example, the music in the online multiplayer is by a band called Wet Floor, a 5-piece made up by 3 Inklings, an eel, and a crab. But in the single player hero mode, it's by a band called Turquoise October. I love that they didn't have to do this, but they still did, even though a lot of people wouldn't even catch this, since it's not really spelled out in the game and you have to do a bit of research on your own to find out. And if that wasn't enough, in the update 2.0, there was added a ton of new music to the game, including some really experimental jazz music by another fictional band called Ink Theory. Splatoon 2 has one of the weirdest OSTs I've ever heard, but it just fits the game so well and it just pulls it off splendidly. Now, Splatoon is a very action-packed, high-tempo multiplayer game, but the next soundtrack on our list is a very simple and short game. It goes by the name A Short Hike. It's in the name. The premise of this game is to go on a short hike. You're a bird, walking or flying around this little island, meeting new friends, discovering treasures, and mainly on your quest to get a signal to your phone on top of this mountain, so you can give a call to your old mum. The soundtrack is very acoustic. Guitar, accordion, bongo drums, it all gives this sense of nostalgia, even though the game isn't very old. It also just goes fantastic with the art style, pixelated with very warm and welcoming colors, and that's exactly what the OST makes you feel like. The engineering of this soundtrack is just pure genius, and I learned this through a video on the YouTube channel Scruffy, where Scruffy actually interviews the composer of this game, Mark Sparling. Now, I could try and sit here and explain how all the engineering of the soundtrack works, but Mark Sparling, together with Scruffy's amazing visuals, just makes it much easier to understand. I reached out to Scruffy, and he was so incredibly kind to let me use that part in this video. Thank you again. So I left the link to his channel together with the video I'm talking about down in the description below. Well, without further ado, Mark and Scruffy, take it away.
So in the first game area, you have the bay, the campground, and the western shoreline. All of these areas share a percussion layer, layer 1, that hopefully gives them a sense of connectivity. The bay is a focal point that I wanted to highlight with a slightly more memorable and active melody, layer 2. So it has its own melody layer, but its background chord layer, layer 3, is shared with the campground. The campground has a slightly less active melody, layer 4, and then the campground melody also carries over to the western shoreline, but there is a different accompaniment, layer 5. And then there's also a layer that comes in when you're flying that's very influenced by Steve Reich's Music for 18 Musicians.
Isn't that just amazing? It gives it all this sense of connectivity while still giving each area some sort of uniqueness. Very original, and while it's probably been done before, I've never seen it visualized in such a good and understandable way. And Mark Sparling actually just does it in such a seamless way that I didn't even notice this the first time I played the game. The soundtrack really nails the feel of a mountain hike, as the music transforms over the course of your hike, and actually gets a bit emotional at times. If you haven't played this game, it's only about 2 hours long, and it's just a bloody good time. That way you can also experience how the music changes when you're running or flying around the island. Speaking of island, let's go to the 8th soundtrack on this list, Animal Crossing: New Horizons. The Animal Crossing series has the reputation of having some of the best music in video game history, and with its latest entry in the series, Animal Crossing: New Horizons, it really lives up to that reputation. That's in my opinion, of course. You're starting a life on a deserted island, and now have to slowly build a small city with its own shops, bridges, and villages. One of Animal Crossing's big selling features is that the time in game follows the real world equivalent. So 1 hour in Animal Crossing is the same as 1 hour in the real world. Crazy, huh? Here's where the soundtrack comes in, because for every hour that passes, a new song plays. So in a full day there is 24 unique songs that each match that hour of the day. The early hours, 7 to 8 AM, are more energetic compared to the late evening like 11 PM and midnight. And they even have different variations of these songs for certain occasions, such as when it's raining. Animal Crossing is a game that you can easily get lost in for hours, in a good way. And for that you need songs that you can hear for hours and hours on end without getting tired of them. Also because you have to listen to the same 4-minute plus song for an entire hour. But the team behind the Animal Crossing soundtrack has mastered this task to an S+. And I haven't even gotten to the best part yet. KK Slider, a dog musician that comes and plays a concert every Saturday evening. He has over 100 songs that you can hear either played live or you can buy his songs at the shop and hear a more simplified version at home in your player of your choice. Each song is very different and there's something in every genre. They even matched the cover art for the albums so it fitted songs that they were parodying or taking inspiration from. I just think it's so cool that so much effort has gotten into making it feel like KK Slider is a real celebrity in the game. If I had to choose a soundtrack to listen to while I went through my day, Animal Crossing New Horizons would take the spot. And I can't wait to hear the music when the next Animal Crossing game hits the stores. We've now reached the penultimate soundtrack on this list, and it's a soundtrack and game that I hold very dear to my heart. The name of the game is Celeste. You need to overcome your anxiety and climb the mountain called Celeste. That is the premise of this game. Extremely simple in thought, but brilliantly executed. Lena Raine is the genius behind the soundtrack of Celeste, and words cannot describe how good this soundtrack is. The combination of synth and the whole reverb feel to it all makes you really want to climb the mountain. It gives you this sense of what's next? I want to find out. My personal favorite song of the soundtrack is the song Resurrections, a 9-minute masterpiece that always gives me goosebumps when I listen to it. I found this comment by user going by Manya that reads, "I paid for this song and as a bonus it came with an awesome game." That's exactly how I feel about the track also, and it just shows how good these songs of Celeste really are. Celeste tackles the subject of mental illness in a way I've never seen in any other video game, and the music perfectly complements that feeling of depression and anxiety. Mental illness is a huge and underreported problem, and it's just really nice to have a game that actually shines some light on such a topic. All in all, the soundtrack of Celeste is an emotional masterpiece with no right to be as good as it is, and Lena Raine, please never stop making music. We're now going into the last soundtrack of this list. And what's better than one soundtrack? You might say 2, but the right answer is 3.
Hold on, Felix, that doesn't really make sense.
Yes, it does. Mario has some of the best and most memorable music of all video games, and I knew I had to at least feature one of them on this list. But I didn't really want to clutter the list, so I went with the best solution. A collection of 3 of the best games and soundtracks of all time. Super Mario 64, Super Mario Sunshine, and Super Mario Galaxy. And on top of these 3 games, you even get the soundtrack included, separately. So let's start with the soundtrack of the first game in this collection. Mario 64.
It's me, Mario!
The first 3D Mario game ever, and a game that revolutionized the gaming industry as we know it today. Mario 64 is maybe the most iconic game of all time. Sure, the visuals haven't aged very well, but without it, we wouldn't be here where we are today. Now, a game that iconic has to have an iconic soundtrack, right? Mario 64's soundtrack is nothing short of amazing. Koji Kondo, the composer of the original Super Mario Bros. Game, is back again, this time with some of the catchiest and nostalgia-filled tracks of all time. Castle Theme, Bob-omb Battlefield, and the best one of them all, the track that plays in the level Dire Dire Docks, also used in some Jolly Roger thing that no one really cares about. The soundtrack of Mario 64 is simple and sweet, but that just shows that you don't need a lot of advanced gear to make one of the best and most iconic OSTs in history. So the next game in the collection, Mario Sunshine, I haven't actually played yet, so I'm getting help from my friend and co-host, Alex.
Thanks, Felix. Super Mario Sunshine is a game that, whilst not entirely as fondly remembered as its cohorts, still has the chops to be a damned good time, but we're here to talk about noises, specifically rhythmic noises that become music. The sound font in this game is tremendous, if only for its meme potential, but the real star of the show in my books is Delfino Plaza. The muted Spanish guitars, the accordion, which has come up a surprising number of times in this video, it's bursting with summer colour and tropical cum Mediterranean flavour that really sells the island as a holiday resort. Is it the best Mario soundtrack ever? No, it's not, but tell me it doesn't get stuck in your head and I'll show you a liar. You. And that's me done. Back over to you, Felix.
Thank you so much, Alex. And that brings us to the last game in this collection. One of my favorite games of all time, and also the last soundtrack that we're gonna talk about today. The soundtrack of Super Mario Galaxy. As the name implies, Mario is going into space, and for the first time, the music for Mario game was played by a full orchestra. Right from the first second, you get blasted by horns, harps, spacey synths, and you just know that you're in for a hell of a ride. Every track is filled with so much passion and personality, and while it might have been a worry that how they're gonna make orchestral pieces feel like they fit in a Mario game, you can take those worries and throw them into the galaxy because Mario Galaxy's soundtrack delivers in every way possible. Rosalina's Observatory, that over time, the more grand stars you get, evolves from a very empty Hopwell theme to a whole orchestra playing together in perfect harmony. There are so many incredible songs in this game, but my personal favorite has to go to Gusty Gardens. The guitar, violin, horns, everything just works and complement each other so goddamn well. And on top of that, it's just such an incredible composition by Mahito Yokota, who did a fantastic job on this OST. Mario Galaxy will go down in history as one of the best soundtracks not only in a Mario game, but of all time. And that brings us to the end of this video. Which one of the soundtracks was your favorite? If I had to choose, I just couldn't, because I love all these soundtracks so incredibly much. I really hope you enjoyed this video and the soundtracks that I chose for this list. But as I said in the start of the video, if you felt that there was any soundtracks that just needed to have been here, let us know in the comments below, and I might do another one of these in the future with your picks. But yeah, that was everything I had to say about 10 of the best soundtracks on the Switch, and maybe you even learned a thing or two about these soundtracks that you didn't already know. Felix from Nintendo Life here, out.